Hi, I'm Danny, and today I'm going to be recommending to you some of my favorite books that I think you might like also. Now, the first book I got from my mother when I was around 15, and it is the book that got me into reading. Thank you, Mother, because I know you're watching this. And it is Sex and a Single Vampire by Kate McAllister. Now, this book is not as sexual as the title makes it sound. It is about a vampire, but it is about a vampire called, it is about a type of vampire called Dark Ones, and certain ones are born without souls, some are born with souls, and it gets too complicated if I try to explain to you why. But basically, Dark Ones have to find their beloveds, and that beloved can restore their soul to them. But if a Dark One has children with his beloved before his soul is restored, that child is also born without a soul, but once his soul is restored, the child is born with a soul. So this is about Allie. She is a ghost summoner, and she, well, summons ghosts, and throughout her career, she's looking in this one haunted house for a specific ghost, and she runs across Christian, who is the Dark One. She tries to help him, thinking he's in danger, but of course he put himself in that situation to make some sort of demon come after him. So throughout the story, she's trying to run from him because she doesn't believe in romance. She's had very bad relationships and one that almost killed her in the past. And it is just a very good book. You see her not only grow and open up to him, but you see Christian, he seems kind of arrogant and kind of like a major butthole during the beginning of the story, but as the story goes along, you get to see him also kind of open up and show a much softer side. Next I have Tall, Dark, and Hungry by Lynsay Sands. This is about Bastian and Terry. This story takes a much more scientific twist on the vampire myth. The reason that they need blood and stay young looking forever are there these little tiny nanobots that live in their blood. So anytime their body needs healing, such as like being in the sun too long, so sunburn and all that stuff that could happen to you from being in the sun too long, the nanobots are constantly fixing it. So that is one of the reasons they stay out of the sun, because without so much sun, they don't have to drink as much blood. And Terry is actually the cousin of Kate from the first book, which is actually Single White Vampire, and Lucian's brother, and Bastian's brother Lucian. They are getting married, and so Terry comes into town for the wedding and to help Kate, because she's also Kate's maid of honor. And the whole thing is them trying, while Kate and Lucas are gone, is them trying to fix their wedding and fall in love at the same time, and Bastian to tell Terry that he is a vampire. Next I have Vampire Interrupted, also by Lynsay Sands. This is the same series as Tall, Dark, and Hungry, and I forgot to mention it before, it is called the Argenue series. And this is about Marguerite, who meets a man that she supposedly was with for almost a century in the past, but she has no recollection of him whatsoever. It is mentioned before in previous books like Tall, Dark, and Hungry and Single White Vampire that the vampires in this story can not only hypnotize but read the minds of people who are not their soulmates. I forget what they call them in this series. So Marguerite meets Julius, and he's angry at her for not only leaving him in the past, but supposedly almost killing their son. But she has no recollection of this whatsoever, because her abusive ex-husband came back for her. He left, she thought he was dead, and he came back for her, saw she was with her new family, and decided if he couldn't have her, no one would. So he decided if he was going to be miserable, he was going to make her life miserable. Not only did he hypnotized her to almost killing her son, he took her away from her husband and erased her memory of him completely. So this is definitely a kind of suspenseful but romantic and fun book at the same time, and there are plenty of funny moments. I know it doesn't sound like it would be too funny, but there are funny moments. So the next 3 books I'm going to recommend are actually within the same series. This one is about Julian. He is a vampire hunter, but the vampires in these books, there are 2 different types of vampires. There are Carpathians and there are vampires. Vampires are Carpathians who have chosen to give up their soul to evil in order to feel pleasure again. Because Carpathians, after like 2 or 3 centuries of living, start not only losing their sense of color, but their emotions as well, to where they would do anything to feel just the slightest hint of anything. And so some Carpathians, instead of unable to wait for their life mates anymore, decide to give their soul up to the dark side in order to feel the rush of the kill. So, Dark Challenge is about Julian Desiree, and Julian is a vampire hunter who's been sent to protect this band, who he doesn't know are actually Carpathians, but once he shows up, he not only senses that within them, like Carpathians can sense each other somehow, like through their mind. And so he ends up finding his life mate within this band, who is Desiree. And this is actually the first book where you actually see a natural born Carpathian female. And so it was definitely different from the other books in the series, which are mainly kind of like Carpathians find a human female with psychic ability who are able to become Carpathian. You get to see a actual Carpathian woman. She's just almost as powerful as he is. She's centuries old, and so she's not helpless like the human women are, and it was definitely a refreshing take on the series. Next is Dark Magic. This is Julian and Savannah. Again, a natural born Carpathian female, but she is only about 18 or 19 in this story, so she's a lot younger than Desiree was. So she's still kind of learning her powers, and she doesn't want to be married or mated to Gregory, who is her life mate. She believes he's too old and that somehow he manipulated it to where she would be his life mate instead of someone else's. Because Gregory is the oldest Carpathian next to Savannah's father, who is also his best friend. And she believes that he somehow manipulated it to where she would not be able to mate it to anyone but him. But it's definitely good because you not only get to see kind of how Gregory is suffering from his old age. Not only can he see and feel things again, but he's used to, everyone doing what he says when he says, and Savannah will do the exact opposite of everything he says. If he says run, she will stay planted where she is. And the last book that is my favorite in this series is Dark Fire. Now this is about Tempest and Darius. Darius, again, is one of the, not as old as Gregory is, but he's definitely one of the older Carpathian men, and he expects people to do what he says when he says, because from the time that they were children, Darius, who is also in the book Dark Challenge, he is Desiree's brother. He's used to people doing what he says when he says, and he's just started to put up with his sister's life mate, and then he finds his own life mate in a girl named Tempest. And Tempest is a very powerful psychic. She can communicate with animals, and he has to deal with a not only defiant but scared mate, because Tempest, again, in the past has had traumatic things happen to her, and things are still happening to her as she tries to get away from Darius, not from Darius but from other people. And it's good, it's nice to see not only how he brings her out of her shell, but how she defies him. It's so funny to see how frustrated he gets. The next book I have is Hunger Like No Other by Chris Lee Cole. This is about Emma, who is a half vampire, half Valkyrie, and she meets her mate named Lucian in this book. And Lucian is a millennia-old werewolf who has been held prisoner in a vampire dungeon and been tortured for, I believe, about 100 years. So when he gets out, he smells his mate, he manages to somehow break his chains and get out. And then he meets Emma, who he believes is just a vampire. So not only is he cursing fate for giving him a plain vampire mate, he believes that she's older than she is. He knows older vampires not only can they rise when the sun is just barely in the sky, but they can also go weeks, sometimes months, without feeding. So he believes that he can get her to his house before she needs to feed again. But of course, he ends up practically starving her to death, and only throughout the story does he realize, is she not as old as she says she is, but she's completely inexperienced in practically all things. She knows a little bit about her powers, but not much. And the whole thing is her trying to get away from him trying to keep her with him, him trying to get over his hatred towards vampires. He doesn't hate her by the end of the story, or by the middle of the story, I should say, but he still's got this hatred for vampires. And Emma was actually in Paris, where Lucien found her, looking for her biological father, who is a vampire because her mother was a Valkyrie. And her mother died in childbirth from heartbreak, which is supposedly one of the few ways you can kill a Valkyrie, is by their soulmates breaking their heart. So it is definitely a fun series, and is a bit more erotic than the previous books before it, but that I had read by that time. But I am definitely love this book. It is one of my top 10 favorites, and probably always will be. Next I have A Whisper of Eternity by Amanda Ashley. This is about a vampire who finds the reincarnation of his first love. You get to see Terry, the woman of the reincarnation of Dominique's love. You get to see her not only falling in love with him all over again, but she keeps constantly having dreams of the past, and those dreams kind of scare her, but at the same time they draw her to him more. And she starts kind of pushing him away, and she starts going out with this other guy, and of course he does not like that. So he kidnaps her, takes her to his house, and again they fall in love even more. And then Dominique's creator comes into town and just stirs up a whole bunch of trouble. And it is still one of my favorites, and I've reread this like at least 5 times since I originally got it. Never came out. I don't know what happened. Just never did, and I was really disappointed.